Imagine a platform where you can register a phishing domain, clone your target's exact brand for a sign name page, and have a fully functional voice phishing operation running all in under 5 minutes. Well, that platform exists and it's called WorkPanel. And a new report just gave us an inside look into how it works.
Welcome to Shadow Talk, a cybersecurity podcast powered by ReliaQuest, the leader in agentic AI security operations. I'm Alexandra Moore, Threat Intelligence Manager.
And I'm John Dilgen, Threat Intelligence Analyst.
So before we move into today's discussion, we want to briefly address recent security activity involving ReliaQuest. So we've brought on Brandon Tirado, our Vice President of Grey Matter Operations, who's joining us to discuss it. So Brandon, at a high level, can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Alex. So on August 22nd, a threat actor associated with Shiny Hunters was able to socially engineer a ReliaQuest employee and obtain valid session to that employee's Okta's dashboard. And it's important not only to address what happened, but also to explain like how we prepared for it. Naturally, as a cybersecurity company, we understand that humans can be the weakest link in the security chain, which is why we do not rely on the hope that these attempts will never occur. We plan for them, repeatedly test our response and architect our environment to limit the impact of an initial compromise. Scenarios like this, including social engineering leading to an unauthorized identity session, have just been tabletopped and exercised extensively over the years. This is what's really we discuss on this podcast all the time, and it's what we're helping our customers prepare for every day. Having the great fortune of helping make security possible for some of the world's largest and most trusted brands.
All right, Brandon, that was a good overview. What was this threat actor actually able to see or do during that session?
Yeah, John, and the actor was able to view the employee's Okta homepage. Obviously, the dashboard in Okta being what shows all available applications. However, they were not able to authenticate or access, the protected applications shown there, including gray matter or any customer environments.
And to be clear, what didn't happen?
Yeah, and our investigation found no evidence of access to, again, customer data, ReliaQuest systems, or gray matter platform, or customer environments. We were also able to validate that no unauthorized MFA or device enrollment, so no persistence and no forms of data exfiltration were observed.
All right, Brandon. So can you explain why didn't the access to the Okta dashboard lead to access to those additional systems?
Yeah, our controls include things like device trust, which essentially is put into place to prevent non-ReliaQuest devices from being able to access any applications or systems beyond that login page, and then containment actions, obviously then terminated the actor sessions, also expiring their password of the user and resetting every authentication factor as a result.
All right. And then finally on this one, what should our customers take away from this?
Yeah, Alex, I'd say the key takeaway here is that, our layered access control worked as intended. Although the threat actor obtained an Okta dashboard session, they could not access the protected applications and or customer environments or any customer data as a result.
All right. Thanks, Brandon, for joining us and explaining that. It's really an important reminder that identity compromise attempts are becoming more sophisticated, but layered phishing resistant controls can still prevent an initial foothold from becoming something broader, which is really relevant to today's topic. All right. So, as we mentioned at the top of the episode, today we're getting a rare look inside how threat actors operate phishing campaigns at scale through a platform called WorkPanel.
Yes, and as our regular listeners will know, we've previously discussed help desk impersonation and phishing tactics that are used by groups like Blackfile, but WorkPanel really shows how these tactics are evolving beyond just individual operators and standalone phishing kits into something much bigger.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this particular platform is a software as a service style platform. It's built to help threat actors automate phishing infrastructure, clone sign in pages, gather target information on who they're calling, and even manage a team of callers and campaign managers, all from within a single console.
Yeah, and researchers actually noted that the platform's sort of design and functionality appear to be consistent with substantial AI assisted development. And I know that we're all really interested in AI and seeing how it's being used in real life attacks. But I think what's significant about the AI use in this case is that it's essentially just lowering the barrier to building and maintaining a really polished, scalable criminal service.
Yeah, and really just think about it this way, right? So instead of an attacker manually configuring a phishing site or using a traditional phishing kit and making calls by themselves, Workpanel enables a coordinated operation. A caller can use a legitimate business contact data solution to identify the target. A manager can guide that target through a phishing flow in real time, and an administrator can create and rotate the underlying infrastructure in minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Sounds so simple when you put it like that. So today we're going to break down that simplicity. We're going to look at how Workpanel works, why vishing operations are becoming much more efficient, much more scalable, and then, of course, most importantly, what you want to know, the controls that can reduce the impact of these attacks. So before we get into the mechanics of this Workpanel product specifically, I think it's really important for us to take a moment to talk about the fact that these calls often contact the user under some sort of pretext to convince them to navigate to a phishing page, essentially. We've seen help desk impersonation, right? That's been a constant, consistent theme in phishing attacks that we've been dealing with over the past few months and years. But more recently, we've actually seen threat actors expanding their remit and what they're doing in these campaigns, and they've started impersonating HR personnel. So they're using the context of things like benefits changes to convince victims to navigate to their page. So, John, let's move to Workpanel specifically and start at the top. What exactly is Workpanel?
Yeah, so Workpanel is a multi-tenant platform that packages everything an operator needs to run a vishing-driven account takeover operation. And to be clear, when I say everything, I really mean everything. This includes registering a new phishing domain, cloning a target's brand, setting up an isolated phishing site. Now, these are all single button operations, which really means that a new campaign can be launched in minutes. Now, this particular tool has been tied to groups like Blackfile, who also go by the names of Cordial Spider and UNC 6671. But really, in the reality, it's designed to be sold to multiple operators. It's almost like a software as a service in and of itself. Each operator brings their own integrations, things like their domain creation tools, the target contact data, a Telegram bot, phone providers, and a team of workers.
Okay, interesting. So it's making me think of something like a traditional phishing kit. Is it similar to that? Something like I don't know, evil tokens or Kali 365?
Yeah. So it's very similar, but in this case, it's more advanced, right? A traditional phishing kit ships as a folder of HTML and PHP files that a single operator typically deploys, watches, and manages alone. Whereas Workpanel ships as a service. Operators deploy it once and then they can onboard a workforce. It's a full web application with sections covering things like target recon, voice call routing, brand cloning, infrastructure provisioning, live session management, captured credential review, and even an audit log.
Wow, that's quite a list of features there. And on top of that, you mentioned, I think, at one point that the operators can actually onboard a workforce with this tool. So tell us about that. How does that work? How's that structured?
Yeah, certainly. So there are three different roles within the actual tool, and they all have different permissions that control what the operator can do depending on their exact position. You've got the caller, the manager, and the admin. Now, the caller is the most restricted one, and their job is simple: get the targeted user on the phone and keep them on the phishing page until the manager confirms credentials have been captured. They have access to a company lookup tool and a limited mailer for sending pre-texting emails, but the caller is locked down to only what's needed, and they cannot see things like the session queue, the captured credentials, the infrastructure, or the targets being assigned to any other caller.
Okay, that's interesting because I guess what you're saying is that the person who's making the call never actually sees what they're helping to steal.
Yeah, exactly. And that's by design, right? So the low level workers here don't get access to the crown jewels. Now, the manager, they sit above the callers and they supervise a team. They have a live target queue. They can see those captured credentials in a panel. They can administer the workforce based in their own tab, and they can onboard the callers or remove them, generate one time registration codes, assign a caller to work a specific phishing web page that's been created, and even monitor the activity. Now, above them, you have the admin role, and this person typically owns the deployment. They manage the entire infrastructure pipeline, including things like rotating API keys. They even have a kill switch for a full teardown of everything. Likewise, they also configure their Telegram notifications for the captured credentials. Now, typically, one admin is per deployment, and they're likely the one who purchases the platform from its author.
All right, thank you for laying that out and explaining that, John. So let's move on now to talk about how the recon, the reconnaissance works, right? Because that, I think, is what is helping to make these calls so convincing.
Yeah, it certainly is. So in the platform, there is a company lookup feature, which is really just a thin wrapper around a tool called Rocket Reach, which is a legitimate commercial business to business contact data service. The caller in this case types in a target company's email domain, and the tool returns a list of employees within their corporate, I should say, with their corporate email addresses, direct phone numbers, job titles, and LinkedIn profiles. The caller then picks a target by the title, typically someone whose role makes a help desk themed pretext plausible. So, really, by the time that phone rings, the caller already knows the target's job title, their direct number, and often even their manager's name. And really, none of this data is stolen. It's purchased through legitimate channels and then weaponized inside Work Panel.
All right, so listeners, I can imagine what you're thinking right now, which is how do I stop them from getting this data? And unfortunately, the hard truth here is that you can't really. I mean, this is the same services that your sales team are using to find leads and to get all that information about people to contact. It's completely legal, it's publicly available. And unfortunately, it's just being weaponized against your employees right now. So knowing that you can't get rid of it, the only thing that you can control is what is going to happen when that call comes in.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's really not the only platform we've seen them use, right? Reach isn't the only legitimate one that we've seen threat actors leverage. In the campaign we mentioned earlier around threat actors impersonating HR and using the benefits pretext, we've also observed them use a tool called Clavio, which is an AI powered business to business marketing platform. In this case, it helps them send those personalized HR and benefits themed messages directly to employees' personal devices. And that personalization is a key factor into why phishing like this works.
Yeah, exactly. It's just helping to make it more personalized and more convincing there, isn't it?
Mhm.
So moving on a little bit throughout the attack, what happens once the call is live? What's that manager going to see?
Yeah, so the manager is monitoring everything in real time, right? Each row that they see in their queue represents a target's browser that has landed on the phishing page. And it shows things like an active status of live or idle, a country flag, an identifier like an email or username that the target typed into the page, and the page that the target is currently viewing. The manager's primary control is through a push button. And this push opens a small menu of different phishing flow pages that the manager can send to the target's browser. That menu includes typical authentication challenge pages, things like a push notification, an authenticator app code, a support ticket completion. And this is specific for each clone brand that's on the phishing page. The manager advances the target through the flow page by page in real time while the caller talks them through each step on the phone. And when the target submits their credentials, the captured username, password, and any MFA codes appear in the panel visible only to the manager. The credentials can be copied out or automatically sent to a Telegram channel.
All right, so that's what the manager sees. How about the infrastructure side of it? So how does the admin spin all of this up in the first place?
Yeah, and this is a really important piece here because it's fully automated. It's very similar to what a lot of these phishing kits do. A new phishing site is really ready within minutes here. The admin types a domain name into a by domain form. The platform automatically checks the availability, registers the domain, and provisions a dedicated reverse proxy, ultimately building the web page. Then the admin is able to choose which credentials they want to target and capture by selecting a sign in flow template. This includes certain ones like Okta, Microsoft 365, or Salesforce, which are common platforms targeted by these threat actors in these campaigns. And then from there, they also supply a brand that they want to impersonate. So this is really interesting too. Understand what information is taken from the URL being supplied. For Okta, pasting any sign in URL automatically retrieves the target organization's logo, their primary colors, the company name, and the tenant domain. If the threat actors paste in a Microsoft URL, then, or excuse me, a Microsoft corporate email, then the kit pulls the tenant's logo, their brand colors, and the welcome text via Microsoft's own discovery endpoints.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I guess the level of personalization that's coming from those different domains or those different emails. And I guess just to really emphasize that there, by automatically pulling those brand elements, the tool is adding those details to the phishing page that really help to build that trust when the targets are called and they're asked to navigate to it. And then on top of that is another important detail that I know we want to call out, that we think this platform was likely built with substantial AI assistance.
Yeah, it really was. The research noted that the console's design system, things like pre-built cards, toasts, motion effects on nearly every transaction, is consistent with what AI coding tools produce when you ask them to build a dashboard in this manner. And really, this shows exactly how easy it is to ship and maintain a software as a service grade criminal platform. And it has all of the software as a service engineering practices that you'd expect from a legitimate application. Things like role based access control, infrastructure automation, third party integrations, audit logging, and even that self destruct endpoint that tears everything down in one single action.
All right, thanks, John. I think you've done a really good job there of answering my barrage of questions and explaining what this product is and how it works. So now I want to move on to, I guess, the significance of it and what it's going to mean for defenders, because we know that it is actively being used by some big names, and as we've mentioned, it is seemingly designed to scale. So what are some of the challenges that enterprises, organizations are going to face here?
Yeah. So the first challenge that we want to call out is speed, right? The main piece of this is that phishing infrastructure can be stood up in minutes, which means that the standard process of alerting at or during the initial access stage of an attack and then blocking a domain is really too slow. Workpanel automates that domain registration and brand cloning into one button operations. So, and really, this means that threat actors can easily register domains with your brand name in the URL. So, think things like your company name SSO, your company name portal, and they can quickly clone those exact elements of the sign in page we called out earlier. So, organizations need a way to block these domains when they are created, not when they're used in an attack.
Yeah, and I think that point that you just made, what you just said there is really crucial, because that's one of the ways that organizations need to be thinking if they're going to move from a sort of reactive security posture to something that's more proactive. And in this case, blocking these newly created domains at that resource creation stage of the attack chain is really going to help prevent further damage from being done. And then the second challenge that I think we should talk about is just how personalized these calls are. We've got the recon coming from those legitimate B2B data services that you mentioned earlier. As we said, that same information that your sales team has. And this just makes a threat actor extremely convincing over the phone, and simple verification methods like your job role or your manager name just aren't going to work here, because the attacker knows that. So if that's what they're being asked in order to verify themselves, the attacker's got that information, they can provide it on the call, and it seems like they are who they're pretending to be.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's very difficult for those end users to understand that they're being phished. Another challenge that we want to call out here, and this is a really important one that should sit with you listening, is that this type of phishing is able to capture session and tokens, which often includes things like standard MFA. And what that really means is that the attacker doesn't need to send a push to the user for them to verify and approve access to the account. And if your organization is relying on a standard or a push based MFA as your primary defense against account takeover, then this platform and these style campaigns are really designed to beat you.
Yeah, and I think the reality of it really is that somehow or some way a user will eventually get phished. Social engineering works, threat actors know that, new tactics are emerging all the time. And so organizations need to plan for what happens when an actor gets access to a user's account, and put controls in place now to limit the access that a login like that will provide.
Yeah. So overall, what we've outlined are a really difficult set of problems, but there are practical and specific controls that organizations can prioritize. And that's what we'll get into right after the break.
Shadow Talk is brought to you by ReliaQuest, the global leader in AI cybersecurity. ReliaQuest helps enterprise cybersecurity teams contain threats in minutes with its agentic AI security operations platform, Gray Matter. ReliaQuest makes security possible for the most trusted enterprise brands in the world. Learn more at ReliaQuest.com.
All right, we're back. So in the first half, we laid out what Work Panel is, how it operates, why it's a big challenge for organizations and defenders. And now we're going to move on to talk about what you can actually do about it to help protect you and your organization. So, John, why don't you walk the listeners through the first step, the first recommendation?
Yeah, certainly. So, first up, as we mentioned, organizations need to proactively monitor for domain impersonation at that resource creation stage of an attack, right? And this is really a must have with the evolution of these phishing tools. So, these threat actors are often cloning your sign in portals using your brand name in the URL, and the web pages include your brand imagery on the page itself, and they're doing it in minutes through automation. So likewise, you need automations that are monitoring for new domain registrations with those combinations of your brand name and common phishing keywords like we outlined. Things like your company name dash Okta or your company name and help desk. And then from there, you can take your automation a step further and block suspicious domains at the network layer so that they cannot be used against your team.
Yeah, exactly. That automation, fighting automation, there is a crucial point. And next after that, I want to talk about constant, really scenario specific employee awareness training. And I do want to call out the specific there. So we're not just talking about some generic phishing training. That's also really important, and that should be a vital and a regular part of your security program, getting end users used to those emails and how to report them and what to look out for. But I think that organizations should be training and regularly testing their employees against the exact scenario that we've described in this episode, as well as any other similar campaigns that emerge in future, right? So it might be a call from someone pretending to be the help desk, as we've seen in the past, asking them to reset MFA or approve a prompt. It might be HR that we talked about now. And all of your employees need to know that legitimate help desk staff are never going to call you unsolicited without any verification. And you need to make sure that that's well known, and you need to establish some sort of verified callback method for anyone who is claiming to be IT, or some other sort of internal verification method, like needing to give an IT ticket number or a computer name. And taking that one step further, it's running these Vishing red team exercises. So actually getting some of those calls made and actually simulating it on some of the end users to see what happens and see what changes that you need to put in place. So that's on top of your traditional email phishing tests. You need to be able to verify that all of your employees and your help desk personnel are following the procedures that you've laid out.
Yeah, that's a really good recommendation, right? As we called out how personal those things are, they're going to have that manager's name. You need things internal that cannot be seen in those business to business tools. So great recommendation there. The third one we want to call out is going to be specific conditional access controls for those platforms, right? So this tool work panel targets things like Okta, Microsoft 365, and Salesforce explicitly. So here are a few conditional access policies that we'd recommend setting up for some or all of these authentications. So you can set policies that deny access to protected applications by things like geolocation, ASN, or IP address. You can also restrict access to sensitive applications to devices or only devices that have EDR deployed on them. You can constrain the ability to add or modify authenticators based on network context, like device management status and currently enrolled authenticators. And this helps limit the authenticators being added for persistence methods. And then likewise, you want to block legacy authentication, specifically the outdated protocols that bypass MFA entirely. So things like IMAP or POP3 are good ones to make sure you have blocked.
Yeah, exactly. And then one last, I guess, overarching recommendation there is to deploy phishing resistant authentication as the default in your environment and not as some sort of exception. So we talked about Work Panel. Work Panel's entire model depends on intercepting traditional MFA methods and FIDO2 keys, passkeys, platform authenticators like, Windows Hello or Touch ID. These are cryptographically bound to a legitimate domain. So that means that they can't be relayed through a proxy phishing page. And that's it. They just can't. So you need to prioritize enrollment for, first of all, your really high value targets. So people like your executives, IT admins with a lot of permissions, finance team. And then after that, work through everybody else in the company to get as many users as possible enrolled in this phishing resistant authentication. So let's bring it home now. We're almost at the end of the episode. So if you are a CISO or you're a security leader who's listening to this, I want you to start tomorrow by asking your team 2 questions. So first is, what are the methods that we have in place to detect phishing and impersonating domains when they're created? And then once we do identify one, how quickly can we block it across our environment? These campaigns can really move from like domain registration to active credential theft in just minutes. And your organization needs monitoring, triage, and blocking processes that can operate at that same pace. Next, I think I would say ask for an audit of your identity provider configurations. So things like your Okta, your Microsoft, your Salesforce, and ask yourselves whether a captured credential in combination with an intercepted MFA code would be able to grant access in your environment today. And if it is yes, then you've got a gap that you need to address and make it harder to do that. So the tomorrow morning action for our listeners is to verify that your organization has some sort of clear and well-documented process for help desk and employee identity verification, I suppose you could call it. Ask whether your employees have a trusted way to confirm that a caller really is IT, really is who they're claiming to be. So those are things like a verified internal support number, some sort of authenticated ticketing workflow that they have access to, or some sort of approved callback procedure. And if that process is unclear or inconsistent or cumbersome and difficult to use, really make improving that a top priority of yours.
All right. Those are some good recommendations for the security leaders. For the operators, I have a few things for you. First, if you're not already running Vishing simulations or voice phishing simulations alongside your standard phishing simulations, then you need to start. We mentioned that these calls are hyper personalized and use help desk and HR pretext to convince those employees to navigate to the phishing pages. So your employees need to be tested against the specific scenario we called out in this episode and future ones. Second, accelerate your FIDO2 and passkey rollout, right? Start with those highest value targets, those admins, those executives, anyone with elevated access, because those are the people these campaigns are going to target first. So your tomorrow morning action is to check your phishing resistant MFA enrollment numbers. Ask questions like how many of your privileged accounts are actually enrolled to use FIDO2 or passkeys versus standard methods like push or time-based one-time passcodes. That gap is your exposure surface against the campaign we've covered today. The bottom line is that Vishing has been industrialized. It's now a software as a service business with roles, automation, and commodity labor. But the good news is that the defensive controls exist and they just need to be enforced.
All right, that's all for this week. Thank you for listening to another episode of Shadow Talk.
Yeah, if you'd like to get in touch, we have that feedback survey available in the link tree. Only takes a few minutes, so please let us know how we can improve. And we can always be reached at shadowtalk@reliaquest.com.
And we'll be back next week with another episode of Shadow Talk.